Never forget the most important question that you're going to have to answer, not just now, but the question you'll have to answer for the remainder of your days. And that question is simply, who did you choose to fight for? Who did you choose to stand up for when it wasn't easy? Who did you choose to advocate for when it wasn't convenient? Who did you choose to stand shoulder to shoulder with when it might have been just you two? But you did it because it was right. And you did it because that's what your heart was telling you to do. That's the most important question you have to answer. Because that's the question that will stay with you long after you finish your last degree, long after you get your last credential, long after you change the last line in your LinkedIn profile. That's the one that will stay. And I would argue that as you're going through the process of thinking about it, that fighting for the others becomes an important equation in all that. Fighting for the ones who might not necessarily be to your left or to your right. Fighting for the ones that might not necessarily be able to hold the title of explorers. But for the ones who need and deserve a champion, just as anybody else does. The others. Raising kids is amazingly complicated. And if you happen to raise kids in some of the most precarious communities of our country, it's that much more complicated. I'll debate with anybody who wants to tell me that every child is born with the same amount of assets, because if there's anybody who really does believe that, there are some communities in this city alone that I would love to take you to and hear you make that same argument. I'm a firm believer that potential in this country is universal, but opportunity is not. And the difference between the two, the distance, the space between potential and where we all end up is where we all come in, leaders. Leaders. People who can look at things that are wrong and say no more. People who can look at challenges and not be intimidated by them and not simply throw their hands up by them, but can look at a challenge and say, I guess that's my cue to get to work. There is never a room that you are in that you do not belong in.
Right.
You know, I think that there was something, and it's a psychology for all y'all interested in studying psychology. There's a term called the imposter syndrome, and what the imposter syndrome is, it's literally a psychological term. But for people that know, regardless of where you are, you never feel like that's where you're supposed to be.
Right.
And so you're always like waiting for someone to tap you on the shoulder and say, what are you doing here? Right? There is not a single room that you are in that you don't belong in. You're not there because of benevolence. You're not there because someone's doing you a favor. You're not there because it's interesting or it's a social experiment. You're there because you belong there. And I could not agree more about this idea of building up that personal self-esteem. It was Frederick Douglass, and I'll paraphrase what he said. But when he said, if you break the esteem of someone, you don't need to take them to the back door. They'll walk there themselves.
So let's push on this a little bit.
That's why he's on the speaker circuit, because he speaks better than I do. He made my point even better than I was making. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that. Thank you.